This is BQ Prime, and we're coming to you from the World Economic Forum's annual summit in 2022. This time, it's a summer Davos. Now, if you've been following our social media, mine or BQ Primes, you know that one of the hot things here in Davos this year is the varied presence of crypto and Web3 brands. In fact, there's a blockchain hub on the main street as well as a Web3 hub. I have with me Sheila Warren, the CEO of Crypto Council, to talk us through not just the conversations happening here in Davos, but the face of crypto regulation, not cryptocurrency regulation, crypto regulation as it evolves over the course of the next several months. Sheila, thank you so much for speaking with us.
Thanks, Menaka. It's a pleasure to be here.
It is, I think, for the first time that we've seen the presence of so many crypto and Web3 brands here in Davos.
Well, it's quite an evolution. I remember 2018 when I first joined the forum in the role of founding the blockchain team. It was crypto chalet and crypto, council, whatever it was, all these different kinds of things. And now you're seeing brands as well, which I think reflects the maturation of the industry over this period of time. Now you have recognizable brands that have the economic ability to purchase based on the promenade, but also are kind of known. So it's been a really exciting thing to walk down and see visually how much we've evolved.
In just a few years.
Exactly right.
Sheila, tell me, what does the Crypto Council do?
So we're a global alliance, and we are composed of industry leadership, and we are looking to create evidence-based advocacy. So we work on, this industry is not, it's still quite new, it's nascent, but it's not baby, right? Yeah. So we have some things we can show with data and prove. We're looking to say, where policy and regulation, we're ready for that as an industry. How do we make sure that's evidence-based and forward-thinking to support innovation?
Okay. I would imagine the top item on your agenda is regulation.
Yes.
And creating a framework for regulation in such a fashion across the world that it is coordinated and not anti-creativity or innovation.
I think that's
Have
right.
I got that correct?
Absolutely. And the other element I would add there is it focuses on inclusive growth. We want to make sure this industry remains available to a variety of different people all around the world, not just people from certain countries, certain geographies, or certain social economic classes, that there is opportunity for everyone to engage as they see fit.
Okay, first I'm going to talk perception. Okay. We just had Christine Lagarde of the ECB say cryptocurrencies have very little utility. And just to quote her, she says, "My very humble assessment is that it is worth nothing." That's what she had to say about cryptocurrencies. This is the former head of the IMF, the head of the ECB. Is it that people are confusing cryptocurrencies, and not Lagarde, but people are confusing cryptocurrencies with crypto and hence are not able to distinguish the use cases for each?
I think that's part of it. I also think you have to look at, there's been a lot of shifting of role here and there. And so I think as different central banks have become more and more bullish on the launching of a central bank digital currency, a CBDC, they are, of course, looking to that to solve a lot of answers. Now, my view on this is that the reality is we're going to see a combination of digital currencies. CBDCs definitely have a role to play, as do stable coins, as does crypto and cryptocurrencies. And crypto is a much broader category, to the point I think you're going for, than just cryptocurrencies or than just payments. There's a lot of other things I think we're looking at in the data space and other spaces that are really important in this industry.
So where are we on the regulatory curve when it comes to crypto and not just cryptocurrencies? I'm surprised you mentioned stable coins given the disaster we've just had in the last month. But yes, okay. So where are we on the regulatory curve?
So I think, I'll take Biden's executive order. The Biden administration's executive order from a little bit ago, I think landed two things. One is this industry, this ecosystem is not going anywhere. It is here to stay. It's very important. It's going to be an engine for economic growth, provided it's regulated in an appropriate manner. The second was that this is not a black and white space. So it's impossible to say this has no value or tons of value. Both those statements are pretty much extreme. Everything is gray. And what I think that the Biden administration called on all of its agencies to do was say, experiment, learn, explore, get educated, figure out how do we make sense of this holistically. So he called for, rather than one agency doing everything, every agency basically saying, how do we cooperate? How do we coordinate? And our certain hope in our effort is to make sure that that model of collaborative engagement from regulatory bodies extends beyond the United States borders to other jurisdictions as well.
Okay. Are there countries that have managed to get some part of it right already that you can talk about as leading examples of maybe how others, let's say, for instance, India, that has deferred its crypto legislation now several times, could study and learn from?
I think the countries that have done actual experimentation and use of the underlying technology are miles ahead or kilometers ahead, right, of others, because they really understand what it means to have a disintermediated, decentralized system and what that can provide or not.
So which
So
ones
you
are you
look at the
referring
Middle
to?
East, for example, right? A
Okay.
lot of countries in the Middle East have done this. Dubai is always given the main credit, but a lot of other countries there have done a lot of experimentation in this space. I think you've also seen some of the work out of individual countries in Europe when it comes to supply chains have been engaging with this technology for a long time. So it's not that big of a leap for them to then understand, okay, now I can see how we could pivot some of that technology and use it in other spaces, right? So all these things I think are different. The last place I will cite, which I actually think is an example for the world, is the state of California, funnily enough. Now, it's a giant economy on its own, even though it's within the United States. It's a giant economy, sixth biggest in the world. And the governor there issued an executive order similarly saying California is going to use blockchain technology for government services to make sure we understand what we're doing here and provide a forward-thinking, inclusive model of regulation. And we're working quite closely and having conversations there to see if that can be a model, not just within the US, but for other similarly sized economies, of which there are many.
The use cases of blockchain are still relatively simpler to understand, I must confess. And I'm not even sure blockchain as a technology needs to be regulated in any way.
I agree with
think,
you completely.
In India as well, we're using it for digitizing land records, etc., etc.
That's right.
And there seems to be as yet no need for regulation,
Yes.
maybe technical standards, but that's a different ballgame
Correct.
altogether. I think the regulation seems to come in only when it is about cryptocurrencies or where investors are involved.
Yes, that's right.
Some countries are looking at regulation from a very protective point of view. How do we protect investors from what could be scams? Because many scams have broken out.
Agreed. Yes.
And others are thinking about how to look at this in a way that they could help foster a new area of money.
Yeah.
Can you talk us through how you're viewing these developments?
So I think there are two places you're seeing a lot of activity. One is investments, to your point.
Yes.
The other is payments. You're seeing outright bans on payments. And that I find very interesting, because why shouldn't you would be able to pay for something that has a time zero of value, right? Like clearly there is a price attached to cryptocurrency at the moment you make a payment that is a real value. And so the idea is that threatening and somehow in some fashion? It's very interesting, particularly when you think about the fact that in cross-border settlement cases, we've seen a lot of activity, including from the banking industry, to say this is a quite valuable innovation that we can leverage and use to make things more efficient and faster, which is interesting. So the bans on payments, I think, reflect jurisdictions that are not being as forward-thinking, or they're trying to preserve, in some cases, I think, another alternative, whether it's a CBDC they're building or something else.
Or they're fearful of the anonymity,
I think that's
and therefore
right.
money laundering or any kind of illegal activity that might be actually supporting this fund flow.
I think that's right. But what is really interesting about that, it's not targeted to that kind of activity. It's usually blanket bans, so that no one can do it. When you think about the fact that most exchanges are KYCing people already, they're going through a similar kind of diligence to ensure that their customers who are doing any kind of exchange are legitimate, quote unquote customers. It's odd. It's an odd thing to say, well, despite the fact that you're following the same process, you can't use this particular thing. It's interesting. And so let's put that one place. Sure. Now, on the investment side, I fully believe, yes, this industry needs regulation in that space, because we want to make sure all these scammers and people, and there aren't as many as I think sometimes a popular imagination, but the ones that are quite successful, shall we say. And it's quite a bit of dollar value. We have a lot of interest in making sure that activity is disincentivized, is captured, is corrected, punitive measures, whatever it is, right, and make people whole. But what I think is interesting is we tend to put this in a lens of consumer protection, protecting consumers, when I actually think it should be about consumer empowerment and agency. Because humans are human. There's always going to be somebody trying to exploit the system, and that's true in every industry that I'm aware of. In fact, the banking industry writes off a certain amount of money every year to say it's fraud, it's whatever, right? So this behavior, we can't stop humans from trying to exploit. Unfortunately, I wish we could. What we can do is help people spot what is real and what is not. So on some level, I think we have to be saying, is there an ex ante identifier? We can say, this thing is not legitimate, therefore shouldn't do it. Or another one, we're saying, it's hard to tell, and it's early, and we don't want to cut off innovation. So what we can do is educate people about the relative risk. And so right now, investing in Bitcoin is one thing. Investing in Sheila coin is a very different thing. Well, maybe that's great, but other coin is a very different thing.
But have you been able to create a framework that will help investors distinguish, on what seems or maybe is legitimate or backed by legitimate, interests of people and what is
It's
an
really
outright,
complicated, right?
especially I think in the light of what we've seen happen with, one stable coin, Luna.
Yeah,
It's
I
just
remember
worrisome, about the kind of exposure investors have and whether
Yeah.
they fully understand the risks when
So
they enter
I agree.
many of these currencies,
Yeah, and
right?
there are a couple things I think that we can kind of do in the shorter term. One of these is let's think about the kinds of marketing you're allowed to do around these things,
Right.
right? So that isn't about the having of it and the doing of it; it's the marketing around it. Because a lot of this, what's happening is you're getting probably very well intentioned. Sure, I mean, it's not for me to say, but I'm sure well-intentioned people who may not really understand the underlying economic modeling, or it's not their area of expertise, and either they're being asked to advertise or whatever it is, or they're engaging it in some fashion and then being very public with their Insta following or whatever about this. And I don't mean to single
But
out
most
any.
countries are putting
So
in norms for
some
this.
are, some are. It's happening a lot. It's happening quite slowly. But the idea here is if you're going to be talking about something as being something you want to encourage everyone to engage in, there needs to be a threshold to understand what that means and what it doesn't mean, right? So I might say I'm very, very careful. I never give investment advice. I'm very, very careful. No one knows what my stance is on any of these things because it's not responsible for me to do that. So we
But
have
is
to
the
make
council
sure.
trying to lay down any,
So we are
sort
working
of
with an international
self-regulatory
group. There are a number of
guidelines?
different bodies working on this. So you've got, for example, the OECD looking at the tax implications of this across a number of countries. You've got a number of agencies in the United States working together across borders on the investment analysis of this. And I think what I'd love to see is let's think about the ways that blockchain technology can support this. So, for example, you could imagine, I'm just this one idea of many we've thrown out, is a just-in-time education. So you could say, okay, maybe two models. One is just-in-time education. So you need to watch a video that outlines the risks, that's standardized, right, for anything you invest in. Before, at the time you invest, stamp it on a blockchain. You can prove you did it, and then it should be your choice. Like I might say, look, I mean, I may not be a billionaire, but I want the opportunity to engage in this investment because, in my assessment, and I know best for my family, this makes sense. I shouldn't be precluded from that simply because whatever reason, right? If I go through this process. The other is you could imagine something where you have a DAO, for example, and the engagement you have in a DAO permits you to make the investment. So you can demonstrate, I have been involved in the ecosystem, I understand it, I've, whatever it is, right? Some standardization around that. And then you'd say, now you are eligible to engage in this behavior. It doesn't matter what your other demographic or other profile characteristics are. It's about the amount that you have engaged and understand what you are doing.
Has the council had any success in sort of?
I've only been here
being
2
able-
months.
okay.
But this is the direction of travel, right? Is to say
Correct.
there are things that they can be consistent, and then every jurisdiction come in and say, okay, well, the way we run this in other markets is we do these things.
Right.
What I don't want to see is in the United States right now, you have SEC disclosure packets. It's like 1,000 pages. Like that's
True.
not helpful. So we have to be very pragmatic about what is actionable, what is useful. Because I'll tell you, I am a lawyer. I'm capable of reading those disclosure packets. I don't read them. I don't have time to go through 1,000. But if I had some sort of video, it's something that could be standardized. So I could do an apples to apples comparison across things. I could make an educated decision.
So what's on your priority list?
Yeah, so right now, being so new to the role, we're really just trying to make sure that there is a global understanding of the importance of the industry and how the industry has matured over time. Because I think with everything going on in the world the last couple of years, crypto hasn't necessarily been the focus of everybody. And now you're getting some of this back in the press and the media. So we're trying to say, look, it's an industry that not only is open to regulation, wants to collaborate, but we also have evidence that we have generated that shows what is actually happening, and then working with these different institutions to craft forward-thinking regulation, and also to say, here's where something's too new. We can't really regulate it, but let's watch it. Here's something's been around for a little while, and we want safeguards in place. So we're speaking to everyone all over the world. It's a very active time for us, but looking forward to kind of landing that messaging, right? This is, I think, it's the future. We're looking at the future right now.
A quick last word on what you make of what's going on in India with crypto. We deferred the legislation, like I referred, and that's because the government is genuinely studying this. The central bank has been opposed to it, and we've in fact imposed or levied a tax that has sort of, in a way, disincentivized the industry in a big way. So what do you make of how India is dealing with this?
Well, first of all, I think that India remains a major player in this ecosystem, not just through the sheer size of the market, but also through the talent, the tech talent. So ironically, we're seeing a lot of people emigrating from India to other places to work in this industry and becoming very prominent, significant players in the industry. So I do think we're seeing a lot of very active engagement and in the education process that the government is going through. The central bank has been consistent from the very beginning. They've not really been supportive of this. At the same time, it's interesting to see that there's not necessarily, you have UBI, you have so many things, UPI, you have so many things that are happening there in a very robust payments infrastructure, which is unique. Like most places don't have that. They don't have that being adopted by so much of the population, right? Maybe some people are using digital payments for some kinds of things, but it's not the same saturation of the market that you have in India. So I do think there'll be a little bit of lag in the sense of like getting around kind of the adoption of this and what it's going to look like. I am heartened by what I'm seeing, the kind of outreach the government's doing, the people they're talking to. I think they're talking to quite knowledgeable people about this, about the technology, but also about the application space. And I do think it's going to be interesting to kind of see, how does India play in the whole metaverse kind of world? You know, you've had some presidents of countries come out and say they're really into it. They want to make sure that their country is very, very involved in the space. And he's been a bit quiet on that. So it'll be interesting to see how that intersection maybe opens up a new avenue of exploration.
All right, maybe next year in Davos, we'll be
Yes.
talking about India and the metaverse.
Could be.
Sheila, thank you so much for your time
Thank you,
and
Menaka.
laying the ground for what work the Crypto Council intends to do. Have a great
Appreciate it.
Davos.
Thank you, you too.
Bye-bye.
Bye.